The terminus for trams which ran along George Street in the city was at Fort Macquarie, where there was a tram depot built in the style of the original fort at this spot. In 1959, the depot was demolished to make way for the Opera House. Few places in Sydney have undergone such a transformation. A view from the northwest corner of the Botanic Gardens of the terminal tracks alongside the depot. And the view from the same place today. A corridor tram arrives at Fort Macquarie terminus, and a toast rack tram leaves on an outbound journey. The view from about the same spot today. The departing tram heads around the depot and swings past Man o' War steps. Trams approach the terminus with a then new office block in the background. The same view today with the office block gone. A pair of toast rack trams arrives at the terminus. Looking from the same spot in the same direction today. An outbound tram makes its way along Circular Quay East and along Alfred Street. The buildings at the top of the picture were demolished to make way for the luxurious Regent Hotel. The Millers Point line was a comparative backwater which provided an alternative terminus for some of the George Street services. The balloon loop at Argyle Place, near the Garrison Church, was only a stone's throw from the heart of the rocks. The view from a tram in Lower George Street nearing Circular Quay. Tram traffic in George Street seen from a vantage point near King Street. The letters at right are part of a sign saying Gibb and Beeman, still there 30 years later. Farmer's store at the corner of Market Street. The Queen Victoria building long before its restoration. From the Town Hall steps. At the Haymarket. Some inbound trams terminated at a loop in the Haymarket. This tram is in Hay Street. Turning into Parker Street. In Barlow Street. And turning back into George Street to commence an outbound journey. Railway Square. And a tram makes a slightly unusual move as it crosses from the George Street lines to the eastern suburbs tracks. At the southern end of Railway Square. Approaching is an OP class tram, one of a few O's partly upgraded to the P design after accidents. Broadway shared by 11 routes in the heyday of the trams. City Road Junction, adjacent to Grace Brothers store. The signal box under the trees at left operated the junctions for the Glebe Point and Balmain lines. This tram is turning into Glebe Point Road, bound for Glebe. Parramatta Road at Ross Street. Trams going to and from Leichhardt. Now we'll visit the Abbotsford line, which turned off the Leichhardt line at Leichhardt Town Hall. An inbound tram at the junction. Marion Street. Haberfield Shops, and a short working tram heads back towards the city. Algae Park, outbound at Harrowbrook Avenue. Climbing towards Five Dock. On the last stretch to Abbotsford along Great North Road. Abbotsford terminus, where the tracks curve towards the gutter to avoid runaway trams ending up in the Parramatta River. An inbound tram leaves for the city. A motorist's view of a tram in a street wide enough and quiet enough for the tram to have little impact on traffic. This was not the case where streets were narrower. We close as the inbound tram nears Lyons Road. The Lilyfield and Balmain lines passed through Forest Lodge and then descended to Harold Park. This stretch of reserved track is now part of Minogue Crescent. An outbound tram approaches the junction between the Balmain and Lilyfield lines, known within the tramway organisation as Epping Junction, leaving the junction for Lilyfield. Trams for Lilyfield cross Johnston's Creek on a bridge exclusively for their use. The bridge still stands for pedestrians. Taylor Street, swinging from Booth Street into Moore Street, Annandale. Lilyfield terminus was in Catherine Street at the corner of Lilyfield Road on a bridge above railway tracks. If you stand in Minogue Crescent alongside Harold Park, looking towards the city today, this is what you see. Note the poplar trees. In the late 1950s, a Balmain-bound tram passed the same poplar trees as it arrived at Rozelle Depot Junction, controlled by a handsome signal box transferred from Campbelltown. A few metres on, Minogue Crescent crosses Johnston's Creek. The same spot in the 1950s with an outbound Balmain tram. The view from an inbound tram approaching the bridges over Johnston's Creek. And passing the points for the junction to Rozelle Depot. A coupled set of trams swings out of the depot and runs along the connecting track to the main line. A Balmain tram swings from the Crescent, previously named Commercial Road, into Victoria Road at White Bay. Further on, we are in Darling Street at Roundtree Street. Continuing towards Balmain, an inbound tram at Loyalty Square. A counterweight system enabled trams to descend the steep hill to Darling Street Wharf. A dummy car on the surface was connected to a counterweight underground by a cable running around an underground pulley at the top of the hill. A tram and the dummy on the surface were balanced by the underground counterweight, rather like the counterweight for a lift in a building. A tram bound for the wharf approaches the dummy car and pushes it down the hill. The tram approaches the railway-style buffers, the backup system for the counterweight. As shown earlier, trams from Darling Street Wharf ran on the cross-country route to Canterbury. In the last year of the counterweight's operation, they ran to the city. An inbound tram climbs the hill and leaves the dummy car to continue on its way. The Birchgrove line branched from the Balmain line at Roundtree Street. Birchgrove terminus and an inbound tram makes its way along Grove Street. This was in fact the last tram from Birchgrove, an enthusiast's tour. After 1955, the Balmain service was cut back to Roundtree Street. The first few yards of the closed Birchgrove line formed the new terminus. The Ryde line was the longest in Sydney, extending nearly 11 miles from Circular Quay. Trams for Ryde and Pyrmont turned out of George Street at Quay Street Railway Square, an inbound tram at this corner. Turning from Quay Street into Ultimo Road, passing beneath the railway goods line leading to Darling Harbour. Harris Street and the entrance to Ultimo Depot, which provided the trams for the Ryde and Pyrmont services. Outbound in Harris Street, much quieter than it is today. An inbound tram. Although once the terminus of the first City Electric line in George Street, the Pyrmont line became a quiet backwater branch off the more important route to Ryde. This is the last tram to Pyrmont, an enthusiast's tour in 1953. Returning to the Ryde line, we turn from Harris Street into Miller Street, approach Glebe Island Bridge, on the bridge itself. Glebe Island Bridge and glimpses of the chimney of Walter Burley Griffin's Pyrmont incinerator. Victoria Road alongside Roselle Bay. The Ryde line was closed in stages between 1949 and 1953, with one section being briefly reopened. Our film coverage extends as far as Gladesville Bridge. White Bay Junction, from where Balmain line trams shared the route as far as the top of the hill at Darling Street. Ryde line trams followed Victoria Road for almost all of the rest of their journey. White Bay Power Station in the background. Darling Street. Ryde line trams continued straight ahead and down towards Iron Cove Bridge. The Ryde line crossed three major bridges: Glebe Island, Iron Cove and Gladesville, the latter two having been replaced by new structures since tramway days. At right, the new Iron Cove Bridge can be seen under construction. Crossing Iron Cove Bridge, outbound trams leaving the bridge. Drummoyne Shopping Centre with an inbound tram. Drummoyne crossover at Lyons Road, terminus for the last period of the line's operation. Running downhill towards the old Gladesville Bridge. Standing at Gladesville Bridge crossover, crossing the old Gladesville Bridge.